So Nintendo did release their numbers for the Switch and all of their software, technically 3DS as well. I know a lot of people were really eyeing up the Switch to see how much better it did, since we do get numbers now for April, May, and June. That is the first fiscal quarter of this year, so that will actually have comparisons to last year around the launch time, and we can look at that. We can look at systems sold to now, from now to then, and it's actually, from what I could tell, the first time that Nintendo's really compared a full year of the Switch one year to a full year of the Switch the previous year. So that'll give us a look at how things are kind of progressing, and wow, this past quarter was definitely quieter, I would say, than last year's quarter, since that was still like the Switch was still like the really, really hot item then, right? It was selling out a lot and people were running to retail stores to get the thing. And it's still popular now, but obviously then was like super popular. But let's take a look at some of these numbers. We'll start right away with the Switch's overall sales. And you can see right away the Switch, 19.67 million units, 86.93 million units in terms of software. And some people are probably disappointed at this time, and I can kind of understand, because what that means is the Switch sold 1.88 million in the first quarter of this fiscal year. That's actually about 5% down from last year's first fiscal quarter at 1.97 million. Of course, though, last year you had Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was still really hot at the time and pushing forward. And then we also had things like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe launch, and really, I mean, that thing launched hard out of the gate. So for it being 5% down and what I would consider a fairly quiet quarter this past quarter, it isn't bad. I mean, obviously we have Mario Tennis, Octopath doesn't fall into that, but Fortnite also fell into it about half of the month, obviously because it launched E3, and while it's free, it probably could have still helped sell Switch units, but this is obviously a downturn from last quarter. However, I will be curious to see how things go going forward, as Nintendo has not changed. They have not changed at all their financial outlook or their goal of 20 million additional Switch units. People are saying, oh wow, it's not that far from 20 million. No, 20 million more in this fiscal year. So they're looking to finish up the entire fiscal year at like 35, 36 or so million Switch units. So 1.88 million means that they still have, for this fiscal year, another 18 million plus to go. Now, they did do very well when it came to software, as I think a lot of people expected that, since there are several more titles out. There's a lot more stuff to buy on the Switch than there was in April, May, and June, when that was part of the first 4 months of the system being out. And you can see right away it's 120% jump for the software, which is very, very impressive. That means that, for example, in 2018, this past quarter, they sold 17.96 million pieces of software, whereas the quarter previous year, 8.14 million pieces of software. And that, of course, is where Nintendo makes the bulk of their money, in software sales, not necessarily hardware sales. So from a money perspective, that is a good thing for Nintendo, of course. And we're actually going to jump into some of the software titles now, because one of the good things about Nintendo is they give us a very good look at how things have sold through to the end of June. So while these are shipped numbers, of course, that means that Nintendo has received money for all of them at this point. That's why a lot of places will say, oh, it's shipped. Well, the company received their money for it, whether it's Sony or we used to hear Microsoft ship numbers. But let's start with the top. Mario Odyssey, 11.17 million units, which is pretty big for a game that has not been out for a year yet. We have to wait till the end of October for this game to be out for a year, and it's already at 11.17 million pieces. That is massive for this game. That is a ton, especially on a system that's probably reached 20 million by now, but for this report, it's less than 20 million for the Switch, obviously, so over 50% attach rate with that game. Super impressive. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which was a port, obviously, from the Wii U, massive sales at 10.35 million pieces. That means in just over a year, they have two 10 million plus sellers on their hands for first-party titles, which is obviously pretty big for any company to have. Below that, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, 9.32 million. At the pace that it's going, it sold over 800,000 pieces this past quarter. That tells me that the next time we hear numbers will probably be a 10 million plus system seller, somewhere right in there. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was probably the biggest game that grew, with over 1.1 million units of software sold. So yeah, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe will probably end up running down Mario Odyssey, as Mario Odyssey sold an additional 760,000 pieces this past quarter, and Mario Kart Deluxe in the next couple of reports will probably end up passing Odyssey as the best-selling game on the Switch, which is super impressive, obviously, for a game that a lot of people back on the Wii U bought, and for it to really be pushing forward like this is pretty impressive. Splatoon 2 at 6.76 million, another 740,000 units on that. Splatoon 2, I've told you guys, is very popular in Japan. It's pretty popular everywhere else as well, but you can see, I mean, this is the second game in that new IP type series when they introduced Splatoon back on the Wii U. Still super popular. 6.76 million is very good for it. 1-2 Switch still continues to surprise me. 2.45 million. And for a game like that, to sell that many is still weird to me because it's not a good game. I know people have fun with it, but still, to sell another 160,000 units is how many it sold this past quarter is surprising, to say the least. ARMS actually crossed 2 million, which is pretty impressive for a new IP in the fighting game genre where games don't really sell that well. We heard Street Fighter struggling heavily. ARMS, just over 2 million, is fairly impressive as a new IP in the fighting game genre. Very good. Kirby, 1.89 million. That's another 630,000 that they tacked on this past quarter. Xenoblade 2 is where I would expect a JRPG to be, honestly, at 1.42 million. JRPGs don't usually sell very well. So there you go. I remember it was a big deal when Persona crossed 2 million. So there you go, 1.42 million. It actually only sold another 110,000 this past quarter. So there you go. Labo, though. A lot of talk about Labo struggling. 1.39 million since, April 20th or so. So that's actually pretty good, to be honest. 1.39 million for what they were selling, Labo, and obviously people weren't really sure because we didn't have solid numbers everywhere in the world, just in Japan, where it was doing pretty well. 300,000, I believe, plus units sold throughout both. That's pretty good. 1.39 million. I understand why Nintendo says it reached their expectations. And no, Labo technically did not flop or have any issues. 1.39 million is pretty good for what they were selling. Don't Kong Tropical Freeze. Again, pretty well there. 1.4 million. I'm again, mildly surprised, I guess. Although it is a good game, there was obviously a lot of backlash for that pricing, but it seems like Nintendo was correct in that pricing as it sold 1.4 million. So there you go. It's a good game. People bought it because it's a good game, I guess, or there are really just that many people who have bought a Switch that just did not have a Wii U. The Wii U just wasn't a good system, let's be honest. The Switch obviously has picked up a lot of people that did not have a Wii U, as we're seeing the ports sell heavily, whether it's Donkey Kong, or of course Mario Kart, which is massive right now. And then Mario Tennis Aces, which might be the most impressive on this list, I'm going to be honest. Mario Tennis Aces was only out for about 9 days. You remember, guys, this thing launched on the 22nd. So it only had 9 days in this quarter, and it sold 1.38 million pieces. That is very, very good for that game. Remember, we saw it do really well in like UK sales charts and other places as well. Obviously in Japan, it blew up really well too. I'm thinking it did pretty well in the US as well. But 1.38 million pieces for a game in just over a week is pretty impressive. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about it, but yeah, Mario Tennis Aces, to me, is probably the most impressive thing on this list, only because of the short time that it had in this quarter. I mean, it stopped tracking June 30th, and that game came out June 22nd. So yes, Mario Tennis Aces, I get why they're doing all the updates, and they're pushing heavily for it now, because I'm sure even up to now, at the end of July, could it be at 2 million units? Yeah, probably, yeah. And since we talked about the stocks for Nintendo this morning, where there was a bet going on against it from certain firms and everything, well, here's the stocks, and it looks like a lot of investors are reacting positively to some of the news and stuff they put out, probably because of the software numbers mostly, where they have bought in, and it's actually up almost 4%, 3.83%. So yeah, it looks like Nintendo reported numbers that were good enough. I think the hardware for what we had isn't bad, but I think it could have been better, obviously. They dropped 5% from last quarter, but it's hard to argue with those software numbers. 120% increase from last year, over 17 million new pieces sold in just, 3 months. It's pretty good. I mean, there wasn't, like I said, a massive seller. It's just all of their back catalog of games continue to sell well. And of course, games like Mario Tennis Aces threw in an extra, almost 1.4 million in the last week or so of the quarter to help out. And it just looks like they're going to continue to push out games, but it does look like Nintendo is going to be backloading their goals. I mean, honestly, I don't really know what else is coming up in the next. We got Monster Hunter, right? That's obviously that'll probably sell some in the US. It's not going to make much of a dent in Japan, but the Switch continues to sell well in Japan. It's really going to come down to obviously the holiday and then the first quarter, I guess, or the first few months of next year, because of course January, February, March fall into the last quarter. So there's going to be a string of about 6 months, or the back half of this fiscal year, where they're going to look to make up a lot of ground to get to that 20 million unit goal for the fiscal year. And it's going to be very interesting to see them do it. I'm curious if they could sell 10 million units in quarter 3, which expands over Christmas. Can they do that in the October, November, December quarter? And can they push an additional 5 million or so if they need to, 4 million in the last quarter? They would probably have some decent releases, maybe in a January, February, or March. Probably in a March they have at least one decent release up their sleeves right now, but it's going to be interesting because, I mean, can they get to that 20 million this fiscal year? Because starting with 1.88 million definitely makes it a little more difficult than if they reported a 2.5 to a 3 million fiscal year for their systems, but I mean, I guess that's where they are with the kind of the slower start to the year. But software, good stuff there. Let me know what you guys think about all of the numbers. Where do you think they are with this 20 million fiscal, I guess, this goal that they've set? I think the 100 million software, I think they got that pretty much in the bag, especially because Smash and Pokemon are coming and it's going to sell really well. And it looks like their back catalog isn't slowing down, having almost 18 million more pieces of software this past quarter. It turns out it might actually end up being the hardware front that might be more difficult than the software front, and then we'll probably get reports in the next fiscal report that shows that they have then passed the Wii U in terms of software at their current pace. So that'll be interesting to see then too, because then they'll just pretty much pass the Wii U completely in less than 2 years, a year and a half or so. So let me know what you guys think about all this down below in the comments. I'm very curious. Make sure you guys like the video if you enjoyed it, dislike it if not, and I'll see you guys in the next video.